So most of us will do our master's degree and then go on to further specialise. Some people will specialise a bit more in obstetrics, or where I treat a lot of pelvic pain. So at your initial consult, it's a bit different to how other physios work. We actually often allow an hour for an initial consult, which is why it can be sometimes a bit of a long wait to get in to see a pelvic health physio, because our consults are longer. And in that initial consult, the first thing we do is we ask heaps and heaps of questions. There's a lot of talking, a lot of us listening, and a lot of us saying, tell us how your story goes. Tell us what's got you here. Tell us your experiences. We ask about pain. That might be on the classic. I would never actually ask someone 0 to 10 scale, because I think that's a bit of a wild measure these days, but we often ask about what your pain feels like, what location you feel it, what impacts it. So having an idea before you go to physio about those things. So do you feel it in your rectum? Is it inside the vagina or on the outside? Is it lower in your tummy? Is it all the way up into your shoulders or your ribs? Things like that. When you feel it, does exercise make it worse? Because all of those pieces of information are pieces of the puzzle for us to work out how we can best support you as a physio. We ask a lot about sexual function, if people are comfortable talking about it, and that could be whether you have pain or don't have pain. With arousal or with penetration. We ask about bladder and bowel function, and that can be things like, is it actually hard to start a wee? So some people talk about, in high school where they start noticing they take ages to go to the toilet, versus their friends who are really quick. Do they feel empty when they finish? Are they prone to UTIs? Things like that. Lots of people in the world are constipated and wouldn't even know. So that's something that often comes up in physio, where the physio will say it's not normal to strain. You shouldn't have to work that hard to empty your bowels. It's also a common side effect of endo, whether you're constipated or loose. So something we definitely look at in physio, and something that you'd be surprised how much a physio can have an impact on. We talk about sleep, exercise, work, relationships. They all, the whole person really, your beliefs, your fears, your thoughts. So beliefs is a really big one. What do you believe is causing the problem? And I think that's my favorite question of every consult is, what do you think is causing this pain? And for lots of people, they'll say it's my endometriosis. And that is sometimes a challenge where we have to navigate of, okay, what can we do then? Is it the lesions that are causing the pain in your eyes, or what is it about your endometriosis? So that's where we kind of explore what can we manipulate in that story around muscles, your nervous system, and things like that. We do a physical examination if there's time and if you're comfortable. So that doesn't have to happen. I've had many consults where we've actually done lots of things without touching a person until they're comfortable. So, and that isn't a limiting factor. I think COVID's taught a lot of physios how to not touch patients and actually to see what they can do without touching patients. And I know at the practice I work at in Subiaco, there is a big push against actually what can we do beyond physically treating. So we do entire body observation. How do you actually move? How do you walk? How do you stand? Are you relaxed? Do you hold your belly in? I think that's the hill I'm going to die on, is that if one piece of advice anyone takes home from tonight's session is that, could everyone relax their belly? So we live in a society where we're taught to hold our bellies in, but actually, if you think about it, if your belly is connected to your pelvic floor, which are connected to your glutes, which connect up your back and forms your abdominal cylinder, the more we pull on our belly, the more we pull on our pelvic floor. So letting our bellies hang out. I say, really, we should walk around like Homer Simpson if all my patients would do that. We often will do a pelvic floor assessment with the real-time ultrasound. We also are trained to do digital vaginal examinations for those that are comfortable. They're very different to what would happen in a pap smear or when a gynecologist would examine. We take it really, really slow. It might take multiple sessions to do a complete examination. There's no pressure. If it hurts, we just stop. It's not diagnostic. It's really about mapping and understanding the pelvic floor function. So the goal is not to create further trauma, actually more to say, hey, can we explore how, if you are finding this uncomfortable, what can we do to change that? We look at the other muscles around the area, so the abdominal wall, the gluteal, and the pelvic muscles. And we do collaborative goal setting. So what matters to you? So a good physio is going to treat what actually matters to you. So if I was to ask all the questions and I write the problem list and I say, oh, you know, the biggest problem is pain with sex. And you say, actually, I couldn't care less about that, Joe. That doesn't impact my life at all. What impacts my life is that I want to be able to go for a walk with my friends on the weekend and it really flares me. Then that's actually really what we should be working on, because it doesn't matter what I think is the biggest problem or what scores the highest in terms of your most dysfunction. It's really clear for what I think going into a physio appointment, going in knowing exactly what impacts your life, and if you could change that thing, would it actually make your disease feel much more manageable? So is that I want to be able to sit at my desk all day at work without feeling like my tummy is cramping. What can I do to get through a day of work? So something actually tangible that you think, this is a game changer. This is going to make me feel way better if I can move the needle on that, versus me saying, actually, I think that the pain you experience when you're walking around the block is not that important. I think this is more important. So it's about treating the whole person, the real person. So that leads on to understanding the whole person. So lots of us will draw this diagram in clinic. And so this will often, I do this often at the initial consult. So something for you to take home. And I always treat by this model. So this is, I always draw a beautiful triangle in clinic. Anyone who sits in my patient list will know that I'm a big drawer. So I draw the triangle, and underneath it's about treating central, local, and regional factors. And this relates to your story. So it's about creating this treatment plan that looks at these factors, because all of these factors influence your disease, your pain, your experiences. So if we look locally, that's thinking right at the crux of kind of your pelvis. So your pelvic floor muscles, we talk about issues in the tissues. So that's things like recurrent thrush. Do you get dermatitis? Other things that we could be doing. Do you feel like you're really sensitive when you wipe, after you do a wee? Things like that. Presence of inflammation. So that is the fact that if you have got endometriosis lesions low down in the pelvis, so your pouch of Douglas and things like that, that is around that really kind of local hub. Then we go regionally. So I kind of said, then when we zoom out a little bit more and we go to your bladder, bowel, and uterus. So if you're someone that maybe has adenomyosis as well, that might be something we'd discuss. With your bladder, are you someone that has bladder pain syndrome? Do you have endometriosis in and around your bladder or bowel? Are you someone that suffers from those fluctuating bowels, and how can we optimize them? We look at your tummy wall, muscles around the pelvis. And then we go up to your central. And I think this is often what's lost, and actually has a huge role in treatment. And that is your beliefs and understanding of pain. So I would have said that even after I graduated my master's, my understanding of pain was reasonable, but until I did a really incredible course out of Canada, and I really shifted my perspective of what pain is. And I think if we asked a lot of people to define pain, they wouldn't be able to define it accurately. So actually being able to understand how a pain system works, because things always are much scarier when you don't understand how it's working. So I always think about, I compare it to like if you're sitting in a cave and that someone says to you, oh my goodness, there's a lion outside, and they start talking about this big cat and all these things, and you're thinking, oh my God, I have to walk out this cave and there's a lion. And actually when you walk out there and when you understand it's actually a really big cat and it's not actually a lion and it's sitting there happily, actually it's a lot more, it takes away a lot of the power. So I think if we understand what's causing pain and if different ways it's influenced, it does take away a lot of the power of what's happening within the pain system. I then would say past experiences are a huge one, and there's really good evidence coming out about this now. So it's becoming a much more studied area. So if you've had 10 awful physio sessions and you come to your first session, or you've seen 10 pelvic health physios and your surgeon, and this happens all the time, your surgeon says you must go to this physio because this physio is the person that's going to fix it, and you go in, all your past experiences are going to influence how you feel in that session. It's the same with if you know that you've been to ED 10 times and you've had bad experiences, that's also going to influence the next time you go to ED. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is human behavior, is that we base all our feelings off what we've learned in the past, but understanding how that then influences what's happened in pain. That if you have spent your teenage years getting 10 out of 10 pain and not feeling validated, listened to, dismissed, that is hard to then for you to get to your 20s and the physio say, hey, let's reframe this. And you're thinking, I've actually spent 10 years of my life already doing this cycle. So it is something that does take time, but knowing that past experiences do influence how we interpret current experiences. Stress and mood and emotions. I think we all know stress is a big factor. We live in a stressful world. How we sleep is huge. I read an article that it says it takes 4 days or something to get back 1 hour of missed sleep that you've had. And I thought that's absolutely insane. So we're all going to live permanently in debt. Well, I definitely will be with 2 children, but I think we're all going to be permanently in debt. But we all know with sleep that if we feel tired, everything feels worse. We talk about environments and relationships. Is your pain worse when you're at work because you've got a terrible boss and a boss that doesn't listen and a boss that won't let you work flexibly? That's a toxic environment. Does that make things worse? Probably. We talk about relationships. Do you have a good relationship? Do you feel like you're in a safe environment? Do you feel you feel validated in your relationship? So things like that. So I would say I always write down in the session like all the ones, or highlight all the ones that are valid for that patient, so you can see where your work needs to be. That if you actually sitting there and actually you're really well educated on pain, you actually have come in really early, so your past experiences aren't too bad, and you feel like you've got a really low stress job and your sleep's good, but your pelvic floor really causing an issue, then that's where we'll work, and that makes the most sense. Whereas if you are sitting there and you're saying, actually, I can really see how many central factors could be impacting my pain, we know that's where you need to spend some time. I could talk about pain all day. So I feel like this pain science education is definitely our passion. So pain science, this flows on. So understanding how pain works and building self-efficacy. So you're not fragile, your body is adaptable. Bodies are designed to change. We know with neuroplasticity, we are malleable. We see that all the time. The definition of pain is that it is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So what that means, and my next slide's actually going to have a diagram of this, and I might actually, that'll be better. Let me do that. What that actually means, this is a hectic slide of writing and pictures, but what it actually means is that, say I prick my finger, or say actually I touch something hot, say I touch the hot stove, we have an automatic safety mechanism where the message will go through our spinal cord into the front part of our spinal cord and straight back out. That makes me pull it away. That's our first safety message. Then what happens is it goes up to the brain, the message goes up to the spinal cord, up to the brain, where the brain then, I imagine the brain, I'm very visual. If anyone's seen Inside Out, it's all these people that are sitting there typing. So the message bypasses all the other things because it's a safety. The brain says, oh my goodness, message in, this is hot. We know because of past experience that, and because of all the information we consume, hot is safe, this is pain. So then it spits out the message. Now the pain is always an output. Nothing ever goes to the brain as pain. It's decided in the brain that it's pain, and then it spits it out as pain. If I was to touch a hot pan every day, so I'm touching it every day and I'm like, this is hot, this hurts, I'm burning my finger every day. One day it's cool, but I touch the hot pan, my brain could still spit that out as pain because it's what every day we've been touching this, and your brain's like, oh, and then it takes a minute where it thinks, actually, it's not pain. That's not pain. We're okay. It's not. So I want to highlight that it is, the real key here is it's actual or potential damage. Okay. So we're in a state of threat. So on the right here, I've wrote a little spiel about the receptors in our body detect changes in our environment and send messages. So that's constantly happening. That is, every cell in our body is constantly sending messages to our little typist in the brain. And our brain decides what messages are being heard. So it just, and then actions them. Our number one job is to protect ourselves. That's how we survive. That's true survival. And when the brain interprets a threat from the environment, the alarm goes off, warns us of danger, and it creates an output of pain. So I think of it like a house alarm, like a security light. Okay, let's say it's a house alarm and a security light combo. If you've had many years of pain over time, what happens is your brain gets really good at understanding what is pain. So if it's like if you touch the hot pad every single day, your brain is like, I know that every single day I'm going to experience pain, so I'm going to touch the hot pad. And so it gets more sensitive. And that is what central sensitization is. It's more sensitivity. So more sensitivity to threat. So if I was to think of it like an alarm system security light, if you've got two houses next to each other, one's yours and one's mine, your security light is picking up the person that's walking 2 blocks away down the road, whereas my security light picks up the person on my doorstep. So that's two people to compare. And that is that it's that sensitization is more sensitive to threat. So that is across a nervous system of what central sensitization means. And you might explain it, other ways I've explained it is like your volume dial's more heightened, so you're more susceptible to pain. And it's a more sensitive alarm system. And we know the key here is to know that this can actually change. You can down regulate this. You can re-normalize this. What we do know is that there has been situations where people have, what they've done research on to know that pain is an output, is that if, for example, actually, let's think of it like, if, for instance, to talk about central, to make sure I get myself back on my train of thought, to talk about central sensitization, if you imagine that you've got 13-year-old with endometriosis and they start getting painful periods, they then do this every single month, we'd be naive to think that people with endometriosis don't have central sensitization because we don't adequately treat it early. So it's not a fault of the nervous system. It's actually very protective of the nervous system to make us more susceptible to threats, because that is how we survive. Does that make sense for everyone? Or does anyone have any immediate questions on that? Because pain sensitization is quite an interesting topic. Or everyone's feeling like they've got that down pat? Perfect. So the way the body also protects, will I go? Yeah, we'll talk about that quickly. So the way the body also protects is, and you think of this like a bird where it hurts its wing, it holds its wing very close, very protective. So the way the body also protects is it alters how we function in the environment, because if we're more, you imagine when you're a bit more hypervigilant, you're a bit more on edge, you will, and because of the potential threat in the environment or the potential threat of pain, you will be more protective with your muscles, which is often how we end up with tight pelvic floor muscles, tight abdominal muscles, tight gluteal muscles, as everything protects that area. That's a really appropriate response. It's just that can in itself generate more pain. So you imagine if you have a tight hamstring, we know that makes sense, that's painful. Tight pelvic floor can be the same, tight abdominal muscles can be the same. But these are protective in nature. So the response of them being tight, we know people aren't born with tight pelvic floor. It's what's changed in their story. And it often is that they've had persistent pain over time, which has caused their body to become more protective of how they function. Something else you might hear a lot of talk about is pelvic organ cross-sensitization. So we've got central sensitization, which is the winding up of the system, and we've got pelvic organ cross-sensitization, which is where, because the pelvic organs sit so close together, so I've put this diagram here where you can see the bladder, the uterus, and the bowel. We call them nosy neighbors all the time at work, because they are like nosy neighbors where they're all in each other's business. So if you start with, and I hear this story a lot, you start with a period pain. So the person has a period pain, or they have ovulation pain that's all sitting towards, the uterus, the ovaries, things like that. And then suddenly they start noticing they're actually like, do you know what? I actually, when I'm ovulating, feel like my bladder's really sensitive and I'm weeing more, or it's harder to do a wee. I can't let go. I don't understand what's going on. It feels like I've got a UTI, but the doctor says I don't. And that is that cross-sensitization where all of these organs, their inputs, their sensory inputs of what they're feeling go into the same nerve pathway at the spine. So it's when they start to smudge a little and kind of get a little bit who's who in the zoo, and they all come in and what are they feeling? And that goes up to the brain. So we see that a lot in people with persistent pelvic pain, is that what will start with one thing ends up being multiple things. The other analogy I have that's really good to explain this is that, say you've got 3 houses in a row, the bladder, the uterus, and the bowel, and one of the houses on fire, everyone feels the heat. But at some point, someone else's house might catch on fire. So you might feel that something might be a bit sensitive to begin with, but then it might start actually being a problem. And what we will find is it's kind of working out which, if we say start to improve the bladder function and we're like, actually, let's start to really focus on the bladder, see if we can improve that. What we might see then is the period pain becomes less as well. So that kind of, it works both ways, that if you improve one, you might improve others. Okay, last bit of what the before we dive into actually what the treatments look like. Essentially the goal of physio is to calm the nervous system and treat the whole person. So I think there is no one that I treat with a diagnosis of persistent pelvic pain or endometriosis where I would not be calming the nervous system, because even if I get the absolute luxury, and I am seeing a little bit of this, but if I get the luxury of a teenager coming in, so early on in their journey with pain, and their nervous system is not a problem as much, I would say you're future-proofing that. So you're working out ways, you're really trying to optimize their lifestyle for long-term success. So things like encouraging them to move in a way that feels good. And we'll go through this in a minute about how to calm a nervous system, but encouraging them to find ways to make their nervous system as calm as possible for long-term optimization. So let's look at treatment. So what we actually do with treatment. So there's different parts of physio treatment. So pelvic floor physio, I would say, is bread and butter. So pelvic floor therapy of what all of us, you'll rarely be likely to go through a physio consult and not get a pelvic floor program. The goal of pelvic floor exercises is not what everyone sees on TikTok, which is to do them to music, that also might be the cliff I die on, is that if we all do our pelvic floor to music. Pelvic floor, like all muscles, should move. You think about a bicep, it should contract and relax. It shouldn't just contract and it shouldn't just relax. So everyone's muscles should have full range of movement, which means we need to be able to contract and let go. Lots of people are good at contracting. Not many people are good at letting go. And that is an art, particularly if you've got a system that is sensitive and you're trying to protect. So point 1 there is down training overactive muscles. So muscles that don't want to let go, and often people won't even know they're holding until they're prompted to let go. Sometimes strengthening, but often releasing first. I rarely strengthen pelvic floor if there's unless there is a reason they should be weak, I would say, and I treat almost exclusively pelvic pain. So I suppose my clientele are very specific, but I would rarely strengthen. I would always make sure full range first. We'll talk about dilators in a second. But the thing I also want to highlight is the pelvic floor are always called the pelvic floor muscles as a whole, but actually they're a sling of multiple muscles. So what that means is there's actually, as you can see here in this image, there's actually heaps of them. So there are bits at the front here. So if I move my cursor here, so you see the bladder here, this is the vagina, and this is the rectum at the back. There's bits that are more targeted to the bladder, and there's bits that are more targeted to the bowel. There's bits that people might have more back pain with. There's bits that people might have more lower abdominal pain with. And so seeing a skilled physio who can tell you exactly what bits are what and what could be causing the pain is important, because you might be letting go beautifully at the back, but the front is more tricky. So it's about tailoring that narrative to you. And that's what a vaginal exam will offer, is to be able to nitpick exactly what is tight and what is not. It also, I think, allows that connection between the brain and the pelvis to work out where your pelvic floor are. It's not easy to know where they are if I think we're not taught that. I remember when I started my pelvic health master's, thinking I have no idea where these muscles are, and I'm about to do a master's degree in them, because it is hard to actually feel them. People might have heard of dilator training for sexual pain. They often look overwhelming. They shouldn't. There's much nicer ones than there used to be, but they essentially look like a big set of test tubes. They should be nicely coloured in silicone and things like that, because that's much more gentle, but they're essentially often used for penetrative pain. So whether that be with a tampon or with sexual pain, it is often, or I use them also if people have pain with pelvic ultrasounds and need to be having ultrasounds either for fertility reasons or endo reasons, or if they want to have a pap smear. So simple things like that. They're used to condition the muscles to feel safe to let go. So if you insert the dilator, they relax. The goal is not just to put them in and stretch, it's actually about calming the whole system when they're in. Manual therapy, where that's actually where we physically release the muscles. So we can actually release the pelvic floor muscles. And you'll hear some people say, oh, I'm going to get my pelvic floor released, or they trigger point them. And that is actually what we do. We will push on them. And if you like push on your neck and then it slowly relaxes, that's actually what will happen at the pelvic floor level as well. The goal is that your whole system needs to be able to cope with that though. Lots of us will massage tummies, which is a bizarre feeling, but it can be really helpful for abdominal wall tension. And post-lap surgery, we'll also do some scar tissue massage. Manual therapy, I think, is always done in conjunction with looking at the whole body. Movement and exercise. So I hate the word exercise. I'm actually really annoyed I wrote that in there. I'm a movement person. I don't mind how people move. Everyone needs to move in some way, shape, or form. It's good for our whole well-being. But I'm also not going to be fussy if you tell me that you want to walk around the block every day versus be someone that wants to go to the gym 5 times a week. That's fine. I think it's move in your own way. It's move that's tailored to your fatigue and flare cycle. It's movement that makes you smile. If it doesn't make you smile, you'll never stick to it. It has to be something you want to do. Otherwise, it will never work. If it's something that you want to do, but it makes you flare, then that's where it would be a brainstorming session of how can we make that work for you, or make some version of that work for you. So I treat lots of runners, and there's a lot of fear around running with endo, but I always say it's a balance between the endorphin hit of a run and how comfy do you feel when you're actually running, to how can we manage the aftermath. And it just means we have to be a little bit more strategic about it. Like, you're not going to do a big run before you go to work. It's about thinking about how we can actually manage that in your week, and how highly do you value the run? Do you want to do it that bad? So it's the same with strength training at the gym. I would never say to someone they can't lift heavy weights. There is always, if that's what they want to do and that's something they're going to turn up and do each week, then there will always be ways to make that work. It's just sorting that out with your physio. Breath and nervous system regulation, diaphragmatic breathing. Lots of people will breathe to their chest and not all the way to the bottom where their ribs are. That can also be something that if I am seeing someone that is in a state of, they've had a really bad, they're either nervous to come to physio, or they've had lots of bad experiences, or they have had lots of flares recently, or they're not in a really well managed place, they often will come in and will spend a lot of time actually stopping the chest breathing as much and focusing on being able to take a deep breath. It's really good for your abdominals. It's really important if you can to be able to take deep breaths to calm our nervous system. There's a bit of evidence about the vagus nerve, but also about how we can integrate that into your life and into movement. So if you are at the gym and you are doing weight training, can we stop between sets and take a breath so that we relax the abdominal wall, relax your pelvic floor? Functional coaching, I would say this is probably a physio's strength. We look at, with bladder and bowel habits, we look at things like what are you drinking? So some quick things that I often rattle off that can irritate or inflammatory systems are things like artificial sweeteners, fizzy drinks, alcohol, sugary drinks, caffeinated drinks, anything that's fun. It's what most people say, anything that's fun. What I would say is that I'm also not the boss or the devil, and I will say that this is about learning, and knowledge is power. And if that means it's about being able to know then if that's something you want to do, that you understand what then might happen after and how can we plan for that. So that would be one thing, is looking at what goes into your bladder. What is normal? So it's normal to wee 4 to 6 times a day, which is every 2 to 3 hours if you drink 1.5 to 2 liters of total fluid in a day. So that's not just water. Drinking too much water is not a good thing. You don't need to drink that much water. We need to drink an appropriate amount for what we're doing. Knowing that it's not normal to rush to the toilet and we should be able to hold if we had to. With our bowels, knowing that you shouldn't be straining to do a poo, you should feel that it's comfortable, easy to pass, it shouldn't be hard, it shouldn't be loose, but all of that is very common with endometriosis. So then how do we balance that with what is disease versus what is, say, diet or inflammatory response, and who could support us in that as well? So that might be a dietitian or a nutritionist. Support around intimacy. So I refer a lot to sexologists and also psychologists around intimacy, but also we have lots of partners come into sessions, and I have that all the time where partners will come in and I will often educate to the partner about endo. I will educate about why people get pain with sex when they've got endo, about what the pelvic floor are, and about how to use dilators together, because sometimes that takes the burden off the person who's actually having to go home and relay the entire appointment to their partner. So we welcome that. It happens a lot in our clinic. We talk about pain flares, so for flare routines, but also for planning for periods. So optimizing your toolbox. The toolbox is an analogy lots of people use, but what sits in your toolbox, whether that be a TENS unit, a wand, specific calming tracks, whether that be your list of clinicians that you work with, whether that be specific heat packs, things like that. Referrals to other health professionals. So this is about who's on your team. Physios are really great at knowing who to refer to because we live in that network. So I think the best health professional referrals are often word of mouth. So whether that be through the EndoWA Facebook group or whether that be from the clinician that you trust, because they will know you, but they also then know the other clinician often, is that it's a small world, particularly in Perth, that most of us will find someone. We keep a network at our practice of different referrals, different health professionals to know who to see. And then returning to work life and joy on your terms. So we started this with what is meaningful to you, but what is actually meaningful to you? So I could always think about one of, I remember I treated her from when she was 18, and we used to laugh because all she wanted to do was go out with her friends on the weekend and drink alcohol, and wanted to be able to go night clubbing and have a good time. And she used to say, it's so unfair, I bloat, what can I drink? And we spent ages trying to work out how she could recover on Sundays and not be constipated. And I remember thinking to myself, this seems wild. Like, this is not an appropriate goal. This is not what I thought I'd be thinking our goals would be. And we can laugh about it now, but that was actually hugely meaningful to her, that was her friend's way of socializing at the time. And she was missing out on that because she either would not go because she was so conscious of bloating, or she would feel conscious that she wasn't drinking certain things, or she couldn't cheers with champagne or things like that. So kind of working out actually what is meaningful, because that will make you feel your best. When do we see patients? Anytime. I honestly, there's no right time in someone's path to come to see a physio. I think we've seen patients that are in the depths of despair and think their endo symptoms will never get better. And I've seen patients that have come in, and I can think of a few that have come in and said, I'm actually in a really good place, but I want to stay in a good place. How am I going to manage this? The earlier the better. I hope in 10 years time, not even that, I'm hoping in 5 years time, I'm sitting here and I've got a caseload, a teenage caseload, a teenage clinic that I run each week, where it's early intervention of young people with pelvic pain. I think that would be something that would be deeply fulfilling for early intervention. But I think that's not the case yet. I think there's things that will hopefully get us there. We see people before and after surgery. I think for those who know my work at Matilda, that I'm deeply passionate about optimizing before laparoscopic surgery. We optimize before orthopedic surgery, colorectal surgery, the list goes on and on. But we don't optimize before endometriosis surgery. And I think that's a real oversight. Where do we sit in your endo team? We are one of many. There can be many people in this team, which can always look overwhelming. But I always say it's like a buffet. You sit down at the buffet. There's going to be different times in your life where you'll have different people, different seasons where you might see different people. And often I will say as a physio, hey, like I think our season can take a break, and that's okay. That's a good thing. You're doing really well from physio. Why don't you have a season with a dietitian and see, and it might be a short season, it might be 2 consults where they say, hey, actually, there's nothing more we can do, but you're in a really good spot and I've tweaked a few things and now you're going great. Or you might have a long season with a dietitian and bounce back to us when you feel you've done enough. The goal is for self-management, but that all of these people live in your team so that they're there. I know that I've had patients that I've been a pelvic health physio now for 8 years, that I've kept for 8 years, that will ebb and flow in and out of the clinic. And that is a well-managed patient that knows that they will come in before they've kind of really flared, but they know that they can come in and feel safe in that environment. Lastly, I suppose take-home message from me is that it's more than symptom relief. I think we're not here for band-aid solutions. Physio is about coaching, and it's about empowering people to self-manage what is a chronic disease and not curative. Our goal is to calm the nervous system, to feel more in control of their condition and their body, and feel like they know what to do, feel like they've got the tools that they know how to manage, and that we can optimize how they function in their life as much as possible.